This is the review you've been waiting for. You're sick of only seeing the DCT automatic model reviewed, and you're sick of only seeing reviews from magazine companies that are paid to give their review after only riding 5 or 10 miles on the bike. This is my brand new manual Rebel 1100 that I just picked up last night. I've already put about 70 miles on it so far, and we're going to go over my first impressions and do a quick little review for you.
Perfect.
Welcome back to Life of Birch. This is Birch, and I could not be more excited to be making this video for you because I have finally taken delivery of my manual Honda Rebel 1100. I'm one of the first people to have the manual model, and this bike is actually VIN number 34, so it's only the 34th Rebel produced. I picked this bike up last night, and it is an absolute beauty. I've put about 70 miles on it so far, and I was going to do an initial first impressions video last night, but I picked it up when it was dark out, so I figured it wouldn't really be the best, and I'm actually kind of glad that I decided to not go that route, because now that I've put some mileage on there, I feel like I have a kind of a better understanding of the bike versus somebody who just jumps on it right away and starts giving their opinion. It is insanely windy right now. There's like 20 or 25 mile per hour gusts. I'm sure you can tell by the water, so I want to get out of here as quickly as possible. However, I do just want to do a quick walk around of the bike and tell you first impressions of the exterior before we get going. So I don't know if you'll be able to tell from the video, but one of the first things that I noticed is actually the color of the bike. It's listed as black, but if you look up close, it's almost like a dark metallic gray. Now, that's not really a complaint. I actually really like the color. I love that it's like the charcoal gray. It's just a little interesting that they called it black when it's really kind of more of a gray. Now, the next thing that caught my eye is really just the size of the bike. Like, when you look at it, it doesn't actually look that much bigger than the Rebel 500. I was expecting it to be a little bit more bulky, especially from the side. It doesn't look that much bigger, but when you come to the back of it, that's when you kind of start to see the width of it. You can tell the tank has a lot more width to it, as well as just where your feet go because of the bigger engine in the frame. And then it could be all in my head, but I feel like the rear fender is wider also to kind of match the lines. Aside from that, the next thing that caught my eye was definitely the piggyback shocks. They just look so sick. A lot cooler than just like the single shock or whatever, so I love that look. And then of course you also gotta love the fact that the front and rear fender are both color matched to the tank, whereas on like the Rebel 500 you either get neither of them color matched or just the rear color matched, so I really like that it kind of continues the coloration throughout. Now, the next thing that caught my eye was the levers. Strangely enough, I knew that they were adjustable, but when I saw the bike in person, I realized that only the brake lever is adjustable for how far it sits out, not the clutch lever. So I guess if you want any kind of adjustability in the clutch lever, you'll have to get some sort of aftermarket unit there, but that's not a huge deal. And then the next thing that I noticed would probably be just all of the kind of technology that you have laid out on the bars. Definitely a lot more technology than I'm used to. You have the cruise control. How's it going? Just filming a video. You have the cruise control on that side. You have all the different modes you can select over here, and then you have the awesome screen here. And I did notice with the screen, I love it because at night when I was riding at home, the screen was nice and bright, but wasn't like blinding or anything like that. And then as I've been riding around throughout the day, the screen is still plenty bright enough that you can read it during the daylight while the sun's beating right down on it. And then as I came around to the front of the bike, I also noticed the wiring here. So on the 500, the wiring is coated in like some like rubber, almost like this right here. You get that coating on most of the wires. This has like a nice, like almost like cloth wire loom to it. It was a little bit weird though how there's like a connector that you can see there. It's almost like there was like wiring that they needed to fit under here, but they couldn't, so they just kind of left it here. And then I also love the blacked out forks. That's a really nice look. The only weird thing is that, like, especially in the daylight, it almost has like a blue purple look to it, and you can see like how far the fork has compressed. It like leaves marks on it, so it'll be interesting to see how that ages and how it weathers, but for now it looks pretty sick. And then of course you can't miss the big front wheel. On all the other Rebels, they had a 16-inch rear and 16-inch front with the big fat tires. This has an 18-inch front with not quite as bulbous of a tire, so I really like the look of that. And also I noticed that the front rotor looks a lot bigger than it did on the 500. That could just be all in my head. I'm not really sure the size difference necessarily, but it just looks a lot bigger, which I saw lots of people complain about the fact that it's not dual rotor and that it might not have enough stopping power horsepower. So it is nice that because it's a single rotor, they did go ahead and add that size to it. And then the last observation was just the stock exhaust. It's ugly, but ugly. No two ways around it. That'll be replaced soon enough though. Keep an eye out for my exhaust install video in the next couple days. But again, that's also just kind of like personal taste. I've never been a fan of really any stock bazooka exhausts. You might be a fan of it, but just for me personally, it's just not my thing. Alright, so that was initial impressions of seeing the bike, and then I went ahead and sat on it. First impression sitting on it, the handlebars are definitely wider than the 500s, which is nice. I think it gives you a little bit more control. The seating position is nice and comfortable. I'm about 5'10", and I can flat foot it with my knees bent. When I put my feet up on it, it's definitely not the most spacious bike ever, but definitely has more room than the 500. It's not forward controls by any means, but it's also not super cramped. Now granted, I kind of like a more sporty, aggressive seating anyway, so I kind of like that my knees are kind of up higher and tucked towards the tank. I had seen other reviews where people said that the foot pegs were kind of short, and I don't really mind it. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't seen that in other reviews, but the thing that's kind of weird for me is like this little piece that sticks out next to your foot. Like, it's not so much that this is skinny, it's the fact that like your foot is like hitting this as you're trying to get to like the brake and the shifter peg. So that was a little bit strange because it feels like, you know, there's enough space that they could have made that not stick out so far, but I guess it is what it is. And then as far as the seat is concerned, just sitting on it, it's pretty comfortable. I can't really say what it would be like on like a longer ride yet, but so far it's nice and comfortable. Definitely cushier than the 500 seat. And with the 500, I found that the seat kind of like made you like roll forward, like slide forward, and I don't get that with this, so that's nice. So then we're gonna go ahead and start it up and get out of here. Key is right down here by your left leg. Throw it in neutral. Start button's on the right. Starts up, and right away you can just tell from the vibration of it that it has a lot more power than the 500 did. I'm trying not to keep comparing this to the 500 because I'm going to do a full-blown 500 versus 1100 video in the future. I'm just kind of like comparing it to what I know, but you feel that nice like low rumble. Give it a rev, and I mean honestly, for a stock bike and for how ugly I think the stock exhaust is, it sounds so good in stock form. You got the nice little readout here. So far I got 69 miles, giggity. And you have the gear indicator here. You can shift down into first and it'll show you first, second, so that's really nice. You got your different modes here. You got your odometer here, got your air temperature here, tachometer here, and of course you got your clock and your mile per hour. Got some more indicators over here. Over on your left side, you can kind of sort through the different modes. You can switch it from sport mode to standard to rain to user mode. We're gonna keep it in sport mode because I like to live life on the edge, and then we're gonna throw it in gear and get going. So last night when I left the dealer, I had it in standard mode. That's kind of what the dealer left it in, and obviously they recommend that until you get used to the bike, you keep it in standard mode. And even in standard mode, just pulling out from the parking lot, I could tell that this had a decent amount of power, but it definitely wasn't anything crazy. It was still definitely manageable. Going around the parking lot, it felt a lot more nimble than I was expecting out of a bike that weighs 80-something pounds more than the 500, but I almost felt like the front end was a little bit heavier, if that makes sense, than I was used to. Almost like at a lower speed I had to start counter steering. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm sure it's just because this tire is narrower than the big bulby tire on the 500 that I was used to and that I had ridden earlier in that day. But overall, at low speeds, it's nice and flickable, nimble, exactly what you'd expect out of a Rebel. Now, like I said, as I pulled out of the parking lot, I could definitely feel that there was a power difference and it was substantial, but I was kind of like, man, kind of feels like something's missing here. And that's kind of when I remembered, like, oh yeah, it's just in standard mode. So I had only been on the bike for about 2 or 3 miles, and of course I found myself throwing it in sport mode already, and it woke the beast. Dude, it is a totally different animal in sport mode. It is a freaking blast. I mean, I put it in sport mode and I'd be cruising at 60 on the highway in 6th gear, and I'd roll on the throttle and it would just pull and pull. This thing has plenty of power. Obviously it's still in the break-in period, so I don't even think I've fully opened it up yet, but you can just tell it is fast. Not like sport bike fast by any means, but for a cruiser, I mean, like I said, I'd be on the highway in 5th or 6th gear and open it up most of the way, and it would be kind of pulling me back, and I'd have to hold on to the handlebars for dear life. I'm sure I'll get used to it soon enough and want more power out of it, but for the time being, it's great. So for me personally, my riding style, I could see myself just always keeping it in sport mode. If you ever see me put it in rain mode, then like, come check on me. I'm not okay. Actually, you know what? Let's not talk about it. Let's be about it. Let's throw it in rain mode, see what it's like. So this rain mode is the lowest power setting, the highest traction control setting, and the lowest engine brake setting. Oh yeah, dude. You can tell that there's not really much power, but it is so manageable. Yeah, dude, it's tame. But it's nice. Like, it still has power, but it's not like twitchy, and it's really manageable. I could honestly see like a beginning rider being totally fine with this bike, keeping it in rain mode, at least like from the jump. Oh yeah, dude. Alright, I take back what I said about rain mode. It's actually like kind of nice. It's crazy how much less power it has. Alright, let's throw it back into standard mode. Standard mode is going to have the second highest power setting, second highest traction control setting, and second highest engine brake setting. So just how it sounds. Standard everything. Definitely has more power, you can tell, but not, you know, crazy by any means. I think honestly anybody could still hop on this bike and ride it in standard and be totally fine with it. But like I said, the kind of riding that I like to do, throw it back in sport, full power, lowest traction control, and middle engine braking. And it pulls, dude. It pulls. I shouldn't be doing that here. I'm like in a residential area, but I just wanted to show you. So yeah, sport mode is what I rode home with it in the entire time last night, and it is a blast. Handled great on the highway. In sport mode, you don't even have to downshift, and you can easily pass traffic when you're already doing 70. I only got it up to about probably 85, maybe like 88, 90-ish. I tried to keep it tame because it's still in its break-in period, but you know, when you get a new bike, you gotta see what it's about. Now, as windy as it is right now, it kind of brings up a good point that as small and light and flickable and fun as this bike is, it still has enough weight that it's nice and planted, so when the wind blows, you're not getting blown all over the place like you do with some smaller bikes, so that's really nice. Now, when I first started riding the bike, I noticed that the suspension was a lot better than the 500s was. You didn't find yourself getting jarred over every bump, and it really just kind of hugged the road and kind of seemed to be like perfectly set for me at first. But then I noticed once I was on the highway, the suspension was a lot worse than I was expecting, and was actually kind of disappointing. Now at that point, I'd only ridden it like a couple miles to hop on the highway, and then I had been on the highway doing like 55 or something like that. But then once I got to the main highway where there was a speed limit of 65 and I was cruising at like 75-ish, I honestly hit a bump one time that sent my butt flying like 2 feet off the seat. Like, it was sketchy. I think I literally said out loud to myself, a more experienced rider would have gotten bucked over the handlebars. Now granted, it wasn't like the nicest, smoothest road ever, but that shouldn't have to be like a concern that you have, you know? And that happened a couple other times on the ride home on the highway where I'd be doing 65 to 75 and I'd hit a bump in the road that I wouldn't even notice in my car, but on the dope little Honda Ruckus. But anyway, so yeah, I'd hit a bump that I wouldn't even notice in my car, or like maybe on my old VFR 800 it would just eat it up. But on the Rebel, it was honestly like I had to keep my eyes peeled for bumps because I was afraid that it was just going to send me off the seat. At least 2 or 3 times I hit a bump that actually bounced me off my seat. He said do a wheelie. It's still in the break-in period. We'll get there, dude. And we will get there, so stay tuned. Subscribe if you want to see Rebel 1100 wheelies. But anyway, so by the time that I got home, honestly, my back was a little bit sore from all the bumps on the highway. Granted, it was I-97, so it's not like the best upkept road ever, but like, I don't want to be riding a bike on the highway and actually have to worry about looking out for bumps and whether or not I'm about to get bucked off of my motorcycle. But all things considered, aside from the suspension at higher highway speeds, this thing does great on the highway. It has plenty of power. You could cruise in standard mode or sport mode and be totally fine on the highway. You don't have to worry about whether it has enough power to get out of tricky situations or anything like that. You barely even have to downshift to get around traffic. This thing was honestly a joy to ride on the highway, aside from the suspension. Now, it's a cruiser and it doesn't have any kind of windshield, so obviously at speed you can kind of feel the wind hitting your chest, but that's to be expected. And if you're going to be doing lots of highway travel, they make a fairing already that can go on the front and kind of deflect some of that wind for you. Now, after about 40 minutes on the highway, I was close enough to home that I could jump off the highway and go through downtown Annapolis and kind of see what it was like going through some city traffic. And honestly, I think it did great. It was still nice and light and nimble, so it had no problems going through slower speeds and going through some tighter turns. Although I will say that the throttle was a lot more twitchy than I would have liked. Like, it was I feel like at lower speeds I have to balance the clutch a lot more and kind of be a lot more gentle with the throttle. So I did find myself wanting to throw it in standard mode when I was going through downtown, and after I did that, it was definitely a lot more manageable. So it's nice that it has the different settings that you can pick. So I'd say for me, my preference would definitely be, as I'm going through like slower stop and go stuff like this, that I would throw it in standard mode, and then for everything else I'd probably keep it in sport mode. But it could just also be something that I got to get used to, because I've also never done like throttle by wire before, so I don't know, maybe that's just something that's inherent with that, where it's a little bit twitchier. But you know, it's just one of the things that I noticed right off the bat. Now, sitting in stop and go traffic, the bike is definitely a little bit wider than I'm used to, like as far as the foot pegs are concerned. Not really like the motor or the bike itself, it's just it feels like the foot pegs sit out wider. So I found myself kind of knocking my shins into them a couple times if I was sitting in traffic and kind of walking the bike forward a little bit. But again, I'm sure that's something that I'll get used to. Going at slower speeds like this, where I'm going over like the brakes and the bridge and stuff like that, the suspension handles that just fine. Keep in mind, this is just how the suspension came from the factory, so I haven't really had the time to tune it or anything like that yet. The nice thing is that you can adjust the, I think it's the preload, I could be wrong there, preload, rebound, something like that, on the front suspension, and I'm assuming that you can adjust the rear suspension the same way that you could with the Rebel 500, adjusting for preload, but I haven't really read that far into it yet. Alright, let's head up Main Street and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about the slow speed stuff. So like right here, I'm taking the roundabout, I'm in second gear and kind of working the friction zone on the clutch because I'm in sport mode. I might have been able to stay in first gear if I had it in standard, where it's not quite as twitchy, but for sport mode I keep it kind of in a higher gear and just kind of ride the friction zone, and it seems to work out a little bit better. The bike can easily kind of swerve and avoid things at lower speeds, super manageable. And then like right now I'm in first gear, it's a little twitchy like when I let off the throttle or if I accidentally roll on it a little bit too much, but like I said, if I was in standard mode that probably wouldn't be an issue. Alright, so let's throw it in standard right as we come to a stop. Alright, so this is a good example. Like we're on a hill right now, but when I just had to start going, the bike is still light enough that it's not going to start rolling backwards on you as you're starting from a stop. Starting from a stop? Isn't that how you always start? I don't know if that made sense, but hopefully you understand what I mean. Like I've ridden some bikes before that are heavy enough that if I was on an incline right now, especially if you were like a newer rider or something like that, if you got to start going, you're kind of worried that it's going to start rolling back. You don't got to worry about it with this. Alright, so we're in standard mode now, going at slower speeds, and it is a lot more manageable than it was in sport mode. You can be in first gear and it's not twitchy, and you don't even have to ride like the friction zone of the clutch quite as much. So I think at slower speed, standard is definitely the way to go. Maybe even rain, but like I said, if you guys see me in rain mode, come check on me. I'm not okay. Alright, let's throw it back in sport, and we will head out of downtown and hit some of my favorite little back roads and talk about how it performed there. So I will say that so far, I think Backroads is kind of where this bike has proven itself for me so far, which is great because that's my favorite place to ride. Don't get me wrong, I love the occasional scooting through downtown and the occasional highway travel, but there's just nothing that beats going on some nice, twisty, scenic back roads. Now, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that this bike really does shine on the back roads, because it feels like Honda has already made it clear that that's almost what they have spent time developing it to do. There's not many cruisers that boast a number such as lean angle, where they're kind of bragging about how much lean the bike can get, which does contribute to some of like the almost cramped feeling that people have talked about because the foot pegs are higher to allow for more lean angle. But if you have a cruiser that is designed to have more lean angle and be able to lean more through turns, then obviously you should expect that it's going to feel at home in the turns, and it does. As soon as I got on the back roads, I just noticed this bike wants to lean. It's not just that it has the lean angle, it's that it wants the lean angle. This bike is super responsive through the turns. You barely even have to give it any input, and you are leaning over before you know it. Now, I'm sure that has to do lots with the geometry and the ergonomics of the bike, but I think it also has to do with the fact that you have that skinnier front tire as compared to the 300 and the 500. It's almost like that skinny front tire helps keep it on track and makes it easier to just flick it from side to side. Now, I haven't ridden an incredible amount of bikes before to have lots of stuff to compare it to, but I feel like for a cruiser, this handling is just like, bar none, some of the sportiest handling that I could imagine out of a cruiser. Now, for the back roads, I would definitely keep it in sport mode, so you have that nice responsiveness on the throttle, and you know, that combined with just the responsiveness of being able to push on the foot pegs and push on the bars and it just doing exactly what you want when you want, it is like a dream machine, honestly. It it is fast. Alright, now we've touched on a lot of features of this bike, but not the main one that's so important, which is the manual transmission. We haven't seen a lot of the manual transmissions come out yet because Honda decided to make the DCT model first, and it's kind of funny even saying that the manual transmission is the exciting part, because if anything, the DCT technology is actually the exciting part. I really like that it kind of opens up riding to people who might not be able to otherwise. I think that's awesome, but for me personally, I just love a manual transmission bike. The Rebel 1100, similar to the 2021 Rebel 500 and 300, is equipped with the slipper clutch now, so it is nice and seamless. You got a smooth pull, especially when you're in like stop and go traffic and you're having to work that friction zone and constantly on and off the clutch. It doesn't wear you out as much. And this is the first bike that I've ever ridden that has a slipper clutch, so I wouldn't say that it would be make or break for me, but it's definitely nice to have. And as you downshift, it's nice and smooth. Even if you accidentally dump the clutch a little bit, you're not going to get kind of that bucking effect, and it's not going to kind of give you more response than you wanted. Oh yeah, nice sweep and turn. Dude, this bike is so much fun. It's insane. Now that we've kind of touched on all the different aspects that I noticed about the bike, I guess it's time to kind of wrap up and give my overall impressions of the bike. So overall thoughts for the bike, I feel like it's just a do-everything bike. Like lots of the time you need to have several bikes in the stable, so you have, you know, one bike for back roads, one for city travel, one for highway trips, and I really feel like this could do it all. You have the 3 different preset riding modes that you can pick between depending on what you're doing. You have the user riding mode where you can customize it to how you like the bike to be. It has the weight to where it can travel on the highway and stay nice and planted and not get blown around, but it's still nice and light and flickable, so you can take it around downtown or on back roads and have an absolute blast with it. It's not overpowering, but it can still do that where it feels like it wants to wheelie. Honda, if you're watching this, no, I did not just do that during my break-in period. It's just all around an absolute blast, super responsive, and does whatever you tell it to do. The key downsides that I could see so far are the suspension. Could definitely use some room for improvement. Now granted, I haven't really tinkered with it to get it set for my weight or anything like that yet, so maybe once I do that, my opinion will change. But that was the big glaring kind of, I don't want to say defect, but downside that I saw with the bike right off the bat. And then I hate to beat a dead horse, but the seat isn't really great. It's not terrible, but I can already tell that like on a long trip I'd want something more comfortable. Dude, that lean angle. Okay, I need to relax. So overall, this bike is everything I expected and then some. Does it have some things that need some improving? Absolutely, but what bike doesn't? You get this lean angle, you get the different ride modes, you get cruise control standard, ABS standard. Out the door, I paid less than $11,000, and you get a bike that can really do anything you want it to do. Not only that, but subjectively, I'd say it's one of the best looking bikes out there. I know some people have been hating on it, especially the Harley guys, but nobody really cares what Harley guys say because all their bikes look the same. Ooh, shots fired. Overall, I really think Honda hit the nail on the head with this. This is going to be a big seller, whether it's the DCT or the manual version. They're both great options, and honestly, I'm just really excited to see kind of what people do with these because they are so customizable. All right, one more good pull. Oh my gosh, dude. That was not even close to being all the way on the throttle, mind you. Alright, point proven. This bike is the most fun bike I've ever been on. It's a cruiser that acts like a sport bike. I'm sold. I mean, I was already sold. I literally already bought it, but you get what I mean. Alright guys, so there you have it. Finally, a review of the manual Rebel 1100 by an actual owner of the bike who is going to continue putting this thing through the paces. I want to say that probably I am going to be the YouTuber that puts this thing through the ringer the most. I plan on really riding it and seeing what it's made of. So if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out. I couldn't be doing any of this without your support. Make sure to check out my channel and check out my other videos if you haven't already. I got tons of videos with my Rebel 500. There's gonna be tons more with my Rebel 1100. We already have exhaust on the way from one of the big name companies. Gonna be installing that and seeing how good it sounds. We're gonna be modifying it a whole bunch, and there will be install videos along the way. way, cool little moto vlogs. We're gonna go camping with the bike, doing trips, just overall pushing it to its limits and seeing what it's all about. So that's at least my initial impressions after 85 miles on the bike. Make sure to check back also, because I'll do like a 1-month check-in and everything like that, kind of keeping you guys updated along the way. But so far, man, I am loving what I have seen, and I can't wait to put more miles on this bike and just see what it's made of. So as always, thanks so much for watching, guys. Get out there, chase your dreams, follow your heart. Only you know what you're capable of. The sky's the limit. Love you guys. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.